Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Claire, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm pleased to introduce this virtual event with Lloyd Schwartz presenting his new collection, Who's on First? New and Selected Poems. He'll be introduced by Gail Mazur. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community and our new and expanded digital community during these challenging times. Thank you for joining us tonight in support of our authors and the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. Every week, we're hosting a slew of virtual events, and our schedule appears on our website at harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our email newsletters and even browse our shelves from home. After the introduction, I will drop a link in the chat to purchase Lloyd's book. Your purchases and financial contributions, I'll also be sharing a link to donate, make this virtual author series possible. And now more than ever, support the future of a landmark independent bookstore. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for Lloyd at any time during his reading tonight, you can go to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get through as many as time allows. This event also has closed captioning available. Depending on the version of Zoom you're using, you may need to enable captions yourself by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual events over the past year and a half, technical issues might arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. And we just thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. And now I would like to pass the proverbial microphone to Gail Mazur, who will be introducing Lloyd. Gail is a critically acclaimed poet, and her collection, They Can't Take That Away From Me, was a finalist for the National Book Award. She is the founding director of the Blacksmith House Poetry Series, and her most recent book is Land's End, New and Selected Poems. So Gail, I'm going to bring up on screen, and the digital podium is yours.
Thank you. It's really a joy for me to be able to introduce my friend Lloyd tonight when we get to hear him give, I think, his first reading from his new book, Who's on First? New and Selected Poems. Many of you know him as a poet, critic, and great teacher. He has also made an amazing contribution in recent years as Poet Laureate of Somerville, where he hosts a monthly discussion program that he calls Let's Talk About a Poem. And these are wonderful, lively events that there's nothing like it. You know, it's not just for poets. It isn't even just for poetry readers. The conversations are great. The range of poems that he discusses is amazing, amazing. And he's to be thanked for that. And actually, I think Somerville and his program were recognized with a $250,000 grant to continue the program. $25 for every poet in Cambridge. The poems in the new collection are in many voices and yet always Lloyd's own. They're variously heartbreaking and sly and witty, obsessed with art, with music, and old movies, and with what happens between the people he writes about, between us. Nina McLaughlin wrote last week in the Sunday Globe in her appreciation of his new book, an amazing appreciation with a photograph this big of Lloyd, that Lloyd Schwartz is attuned to the beauty of conversation, the gaps, the unsaid, and the shimmering moments of union. He also reads beautifully, so please welcome Lloyd and Who's on First?
Gail, thank you. Get a little choked up to hear you say that. And Claire, thank you, and Harvard Bookstore, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be reading for this, for you and this audience. I like it best in the store, but I'm so grateful for the virtual possibility. Um, so um, I'm going to start with the title poem, which is also the first poem in this collection. I thank the University of Chicago Press for doing such a beautiful cover. And this is Who's on First? It's a dialogue or series of dialogues. Who's on first? You can be so inconsiderate. You are too sensitive. Then why don't you take my feelings into consideration? If you weren't so sensitive, it wouldn't matter. You seem to care about me only when you want me to do something for you. You do too much for people. I thought you were going home because you were too tired to go with me to a bar. I was, but Norman didn't want to come here alone. I'm awfully tired. Do you mind taking the subway home? Silence. You could stay over. Silence. I'll take you home. Silence. Why do we have sex only when you want to? Because you want to have sex all the time. Relationships work when two people equally desire to give to each other. Relationships rarely work. Do you love me? Of course, but I resent it. Why aren't you more affectionate? I am. Couldn't we ever speak to each other without irony? Sure. I love you, you know. Yes, but why? Do you resent my advice? Yes, especially because you're usually right. Why do you like these paintings? What isn't there is more important than what is. Your taste sometimes seems strange to me. I'm a Philistine. A real Philistine would never admit it. I suppose you're right. Aren't you interested in what I care about? Yes, but not now. We should be more open with each other. Yes. Shall we talk things over? What is there to say? Are you ever going to cut down on your smoking? It's all right. I don't inhale. Sometimes I get very annoyed with you. The world is annoying. Your cynicism is too easy. Words interfere with the expression of complex realities. Do you enjoy suffering? You can't work if you don't suffer, but we suffer anyway. I know. Do you think we ever learn anything? I've learned to do without. You're always so negative. I feel death all the time. Are you afraid of anything? Not working. What shall we do for dinner? It doesn't matter. Whatever you'd like. Why don't you care more? I do. Well, the title of that poem and the title of this book comes from a routine by the comedians Abbott and Costello. I think my maybe my favorite comic person in radio and television was Gracie Allen, who's had a radio and TV show and was in movies with her husband, George Burns. And this is a kind of elegy for Gracie Allen. Good night, Gracie. For Gracie Allen, 1906 to 1964. It's 3 sections. Each section begins with a series of quotes from Gracie Allen's character. Almost everything I know today, I learned by listening to myself when I was talking about things I didn't understand. Mrs. Burns, I love that zany character of yours. So do I, or else I wouldn't have married him. You mean you understand it? Well, of course. When I misunderstand what you say, I always know what you're talking about. Home very late from a Hollywood party, George and Gracie can hear their phone ringing, but can't find the key to get in. George is vexed and tired, but Gracie is dying to wake Blanche Morton next door and gossip about dancing with Gary Cooper. His belt buckle ruined my gardenia. Soon the Mortons are locked out. Gracie, did you close the door? No, but I will. The locksmith's tools locked in. Will his jealous new wife ever believe this? And the phone never stops. Day breaks, and George breaks in through a window. I've got a wonderful idea, he announces. From now on, we'll leave a door key under the mat. But I put one there months ago, Gracie argues, and we couldn't get in last night. The telephone again. Who's been trying to get through? Gracie, who was on the phone? I was. It's not a matter of whether I'm right or wrong. It's a matter of principle. Men are so deceitful. They look you right in the eye while they're doing things behind your back. Don't rush me. It isn't easy to make up the truth. Ronnie's dying for a part in a new play whose famous author is fascinated by Gracie. But the only role still open is intended for a middle-aged actress, sole support of her widowed mother. I'm a widow too, Gracie fibs, and Ronnie supports me. Smitten, the playwright invites her to dine in his room. My husband died in a shipwreck, she embroiders, on our honeymoon. Lucky you survived. Oh, I wasn't there. In breezes Ronnie and asks for Dad. Gracie, thinking fast. He can never forget his father. Playwright, bewildered. But he never knew him. Gracie, triumphant. If he knew him, he'd forget him. Enter the widow Morton with Ronnie's long-lost father to unravel Gracie's tangled web. Blushing, the playwright offers Ronnie a part. Ronnie's in heaven. Gracie's forgiven. The playwright, like George himself, resigned to applaud her irresistible assassinations. I may not be here long. Where are you going? Oh, don't I wish I knew. I didn't think people felt this wonderful when they were going. But then again, this is the first time I've gone. If you ask me a question and I don't answer, don't be nervous. Just take your hats off. How casually we treated Gracie's illness. Those pills made me feel very secure. I figured we could go on this way year after year. It never entered my mind that anything would change it. Then one evening, Gracie had another one of her attacks. I gave her the pill. We held on to each other, but this time it didn't work. When the pain continued, I called Dr. Kennemer and they rushed Gracie to the hospital. 2 hours later, Gracie was gone. He's crazy about dancing. His new wife has got to be a very good dancer. Gracie thinks she's dying, having opened by mistake Harry Von Zell's telegram meant to save George from a weekend seasick on his sponsor's yacht. Examine your wife, condition serious, urge you do not leave her. I'm a very sick woman, but my health is so good I didn't even know it. She's had 3 agencies send over their most attractive candidates to replace the late Mrs. Burns. Sounds like it won't be easy to fill her shoes. What size do you wear? How old was she when she passed on? Well, I'd rather not say. She hasn't passed on far enough for that. George, however, has already chosen his next wife, who, relieved, reprieved, would rather George hadn't explained. It's such a letdown. After this, how can I be gay about an ordinary thing like living? And if I can find it, this is another poem that's a dialogue. It's called, He Tells His Mother What He's Working On. I'm writing a poem about you. You are? What's it about? It's the story about your childhood, the horses in the river. The ones that nearly drowned, I saved them. You told it to me just a few weeks ago. I should dig up more of my memories. I wish you would. Like when I lived on the farm and one of the girls fell down the well? Yes. I forget if it was Rose or Pauline. It was a deep well. I remember that story. Have you finished your poem? I'm still working on it. You mean you're correcting it with commas and semicolons? Exactly. When can I see it? As soon as it's finished. Is it an epic? It's not that long. No, I mean all my thoughts, the flashes of what's going through my life, the whole family history, living through the woe, the river and the water. I know. Will it be published? I have to finish it first. It's better to write about real life. That's more important than writing something fanciful. I try to write all my poems about real life. You see, the apple never falls far from the tree. I guess not. You're my apple. There's probably a worm crawling through that apple. Then it's got something sweet to chew on. Well, you're my tree. Yes, I'm your tree. You're an apple. I'm a tree. The next poem is a sequence of 3 sonnets. The last one ended with a tree, and this one is called Leaves, so it's sort of looking forward to the season coming up. Leaves. 1. Every October, It becomes important, no, necessary, to see the leaves turning, to be surrounded by leaves turning. It's not just the symbolism to confront in the death of the year your death, one blazing farewell appearance, though the irony isn't lost on you that nature is most seductive when it's about to die, flaunting the dazzle of its incipient exit, an ending that at least so far the effects of human progress, pollution, acid rain, have not yet frightened you enough to make you believe is real. That is, you know this ending is a deception because of course nature is always renewing itself. The trees don't die, they just pretend, go out in style and return in style, a new style. 2. Is it deliberate how far they make you go, especially if you live in the city, to get far enough away from home to see not just trees, but only trees? The boring highways, road signs, high speeds, 10-axle trucks passing you as if they were in an even greater hurry than you to look at leaves. So you drive in terror for literal hours and it looks like rain or snow, but it's probably just clouds, too cloudy to see any color. And you wonder, given the poverty of your memory, which road had the most color last year? But it doesn't matter, since you're probably too late anyway, or too early. Whichever road you take will be the wrong one, and you've probably come all this way for nothing. 3. You'll be driving along depressed when suddenly a cloud will move and the sun will muscle through and ignite the hills. It may not last, probably won't last, but for a moment, the whole world comes to, wakes up, proves it lives. It lives. Red, yellow, orange, brown, russet, ochre, vermilion, gold, flame and rust. Flame and rust, the permutations of burning. You're on fire. Your eyes are on fire. It won't last. You don't want it to last. You can't stand anymore. But you don't want it to stop. It's what you've come for. It's what you'll come back for. It won't stay with you, but you'll remember that it felt like nothing else you felt, or something you felt that also didn't last. Well, I occasionally enjoy working in form. So I have written sonnets, and this poem is a sestina, but it's kind of in my mind, it's the quintessential sestina because I think it's the world's shortest sestina. It's called 6 words. And it also has elements of dialogue in it. 6 words. Yes, no, maybe, sometimes, always, never. Never? Yes. Always? No. Sometimes? Maybe. Maybe never sometimes. Yes. No, always. Always, maybe. No. Never, yes. Sometimes. Sometimes, always, yes. Maybe never. No, no, sometimes. Never. Always? Maybe. Yes. Yes. No. Maybe. Sometimes. Always. Never. Um, I'd like to read a couple of poems from the new section of new and selected poems. A number of these poems, Gail mentioned that I write some of my poems about art, and this is a poem about a very famous painting that I love very much. It's called Vermeers Pearl. I used to boast that I never lived in a city without a Vermeer. You do now, a friend pointed out, when the one Vermeer in my city was stolen. It's still missing. The museum displays its empty frame. But there are 8 Vermeers in New York, more than any other city, and not so far away. Sometimes even more. Once the visiting Vermeer was one of his most beloved paintings. It was even more beautiful than I remembered. A young girl wearing a turban of blue and yellow silk is just turning her face to watch you entering the room. She seems slightly distracted by someone a little off to your right, maybe someone she knows better than you. Her mouth is slightly open, as if she's just taken a breath and is about to speak. The light falling on her is reflected not only on her large pearl earring, but also in her large shining eyes. Those are pearls, sings Ariel of a man drowned in a tempest at sea, that were his eyes. And on her moist lips. There's even a little spot of moisture in a corner of her mouth. Some art historians think this was not intended to be a portrait, just a study of a figure in an exotic costume. Yet her presence is so palpable, she seems right there in the room with you, radiating unique and individual life. Already in the museum is another Vermeer, in which a woman writing a letter has a similar pearl earring. She's interrupted by her maid handing her a letter. Is it from the person she's just been writing to? And in a nearby museum, there's a painting of a young woman with piercing eyes and another enormous pearl dangling from her ear, a teardrop pearl. She's staring out the window and tuning a lute. Scholars tell us that these pearls aren't really pearls. No pearl large enough has ever come to light. No oyster could be big enough. So the famous pearl is probably just glass painted to look like a pearl. Pearl of no price. Yet as you look, the illusion of the pearl, the painted pearl, glistening, radiant, fragile, but made real by the light it radiates, becomes before your eyes a metaphor for the girl wearing it. Or if not the girl, then Vermeer's painting of her. And this is another new poem, relatively new poem. It's called The Rehearsal. It's almost a found poem because it comes from a section of the composer John Harbison's recent book, What Do We Make of Bach? The Rehearsal. At our first duo rehearsal, Bach's B minor sonata was what we played. I already knew this young woman interested me. We borrowed a room, where was it? With a harpsichord, Whose? And with a few words began the sonata. As this unfolded, recognition, confirmation, accord, consternation. Above all, the marking of a common center. She had told me Bach was her favorite composer, her home site. But by the end of the first movement, I knew that in her case, this was not just devotion to the music, its spirit, its generosity, but a trust in it, a willingness to let it speak. What I heard at the same time in that first movement is the loneliness that often inhabits the undertone of a great master's work, the habitation of a realm so rarely visited, with so little company. To find that secret in music, the performer needs an inner life, a kind of solitary experience. I sensed a person for whom art costs too much, for whom the sharing of that intense experience with others is often painful and risky. I knew what that might be like. I sensed joy, possibility, danger, complication, inextricability, a fulcrum, a magnet, a talisman. We began the second movement. This is a very short poem. Took place in Brazil, where I had the very happy experience of visiting a number of times. It's called Renatos Dream, Brazil, 1991. Such a sweet dream. I dreamed I was having a conversation with the great poets, Manuel Bandeira and Carlos Drummond de Andrade. I was born tired, hungry, and cold, I said. And Drummond answered, I too. And I'm going to read one more poem that takes place in Brazil, and then I'm going to read two more poems after this. This is called Small Airport in Brazil. 9:31 in the departure lounge, nearly deserted. Monday night, everyone here is a little too tired to be traveling to another city. I search for an interesting face behind the newspapers and light on a young man, maybe 31, slim and well-dressed, that is, dressed with some thought. His tan jacket and pressed gray pants in muted harmony with a pale yellow shirt, open at the collar. No tie, though there may have been one earlier. They fit him elegantly, suit his thin, sandy hair and pale, fair skin. His rimless glasses suggest seriousness, not fashion, a tone confirmed by the forward gaze behind them, through them. He wears a touchingly simple gold band on his finger, another example of natural elegance. His wife must share his taste. Is he on his way to her? Is she picking him up at another small airport? Will they embrace warmly, gracefully when he arrives? Or will she be up waiting for him at home, dinner on the table, Or not, already asleep when he finally gets in after her own long day? Or is he on his way to yet another hotel after a week of hotels, tired of hotels, while his attractive, witty, attentive wife with her eloquent cheekbones and slightly sunken cheeks begins to show her own weariness of spending so many nights alone? They'll cost something, these nights. Everything costs something when you have to make your way through the world, even if you're not new to the idea, or just beginning not to be new to it. And I'm going to end with two more poems about my mother. And this one is called Little Kisses. My mother is mad at the sun. She hates the daylight. One more new day. In a nursing home, stuck in a wheelchair, she thinks she's been abandoned. In the background, a woman's nonstop wail. My mother can barely hear me on the phone. She doesn't know she's speaking to her son. I have to tell her she's speaking to her son. Oh, then I'm not alone. I have a son. Please don't forget that. How can I forget that? And you, who are you? Are we related? Of course. Are you my father? Don't you remember your father? Are you my brother? You're my mother. I'm your mother? Of course. Was I a good mother? You were, you are a wonderful mother. I'm glad you're my son. What's your name? You don't remember? I can't think of it. I'm all mixed up. Are we related? You're my mother. Did I ask you that before? Yes. Are you angry? Why should I be angry? Because I'm so stupid. What lovely flowers, the nurse says. Did your son bring them? Who? Your son. Isn't this your son? He's my friend. I can't stop myself. Where is your son? Where's my son? What do you mean? Where is your son now? He's dead. Mrs. Schwartz, your son is on the phone. My son? Yes, say hello. 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 How are you feeling? Much better, thank you. Why did you call? I call you every day. Forgive me, darling. I didn't remember. Well, hello. How did you know I was here? This is my son, isn't that right? You're my son, aren't you? You came out of my body. I'm your mother. Isn't that right? Isn't he handsome, even if he has a beard? I'm your mother. I'd love you no matter what you look like. Wouldn't I? Give me a little kiss. Will ya, huh? What are you gonna miss? Will ya, huh? Gosh, oh gee, why do you refuse? I can't see what you're gonna lose. So give me a little kiss. Will ya, huh? And I'll give it right back to you. See, I know all the words. I probably won't remember them tomorrow. And I will end the reading part with another short poem. It's entirely in the voice of my mother. Her Waltz. This is my dream. I'm dancing. Do you know how to dance? Do you like to dance? Waltzing. It's like electricity. It hurts when I walk, so I pick up a chair and I start to waltz. I look in the mirror, and there I am, dancing with a chair. I say to the mirror, I'm not so old. But the mirror says, yes, you are. You're old. You're nearly 90 years old. What are you doing waltzing around with a chair? Now, isn't that silly? An old lady. This is my dream. I see myself in the mirror, waltzing with a chair. And that's the end of my dream. I once knew how to dance. I once knew how to waltz. And now I shall bid you good night. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. Those poems were wonderful. Those ones about your mother were particularly moving.
Thank you.
So I'm just hopping back on to serve as moderator to ask some questions. So anyone in the audience, if you have any questions for Lloyd, please put them in the Q&A, but we've already got a couple, so I'll get started. First one here is, most, if not all, of the new poems in the new book are about works of art. What does this turn away from people and human interaction to aesthetics mean for your current and future work?
Well, I hope it's not turning away from human interaction. And sometimes we look at works of art or listen to works of art in private, but they're not always in private. They're in museums. There's usually someone else around, often a complete stranger that you want to share your feelings with. And I have to say, for me, and maybe it's just very old-fashioned, but I think works of art, thinking about works of art, listening to works of music, looking at paintings and going to museums is a way of expanding my own sense of being a human being and what other human beings are. So I don't feel that experience for me, and writing about that experience hasn't seemed an isolating experience, or hasn't seemed to cut me off from human interaction. I think it's a kind of, it's a different way in. I, I, that that's what I think about art and writing about art.
Very nice. All right, here's a slightly different sort of question. What
Okay.
advice or wisdom would you offer to a young poet?
Oh gosh. Don't listen to old people giving advice. But I want to say, write about what you care most about. As a teacher of creative writing, I was always very uncomfortable giving exercises, though I have given exercises, but I really want to encourage writers, and especially young writers, to think about what it is in their lives, or what it is that they care about, that could become a poem, that are worth writing down so that other people can share your experience. Which also means read as much as you can, and certainly read your contemporaries. I mean, they're your world. But I think it's really important. Gail mentioned my poetry discussion group with the Somerville Library, and choose great poems, mostly from the past. Although the next great poem is actually going to be a poem by Gail Mazur. But I think the poetry of the past is a great doorway into art, into human experience, into, I mean, it's certainly what made me love poetry, what made me want to write poetry, though I knew the poems that I would write would never, you know, they couldn't be like Keats or Shakespeare or Elizabeth Bishop, uh, or Emily Dickinson, the poets I love from the past. But I think read as much as you can. Buy books.
Yes.
Thank you, Harvard Bookstore. And buy poetry books. Harvard Bookstore has a really good poetry collection. And really write about what you care most about, what you feel most, what really challenge yourself to make your experience, to find out what makes your experience universal and interesting to someone who doesn't know you.
Such a generous answer. And it sort of ties in a little bit to another question here, which is, are there any poets whose work you are currently reading and enjoying, or any recommendations for folks?
I tend to read my friends because I love their work. For example, Gail, Frank Bedart, Robert Pinsky, Joyce Pasteroff. I hate to list names because I'm leaving so many people out. Peg Boyers, Janet Sylvester. I mean, they're, people who have in a way have kind of earned, I want to be friends with because I love their poems so much. And so that's really who I'm reading in general. I have to pick a poem every month for this discussion group, so I am looking back at older poems, and reading, and really reading and rereading the poets that I love, Keats and Yeats and Emily Dickinson and especially Elizabeth Bishop. And I think everyone should read Elizabeth Bishop, whoever else you happen to like.
Well, that's a great answer, and I'm sure people are writing all those folks down, especially your friends. So we have a few more questions.
Okay.
This one says, thank you, Lloyd. So many of your poems involve intriguing dialogues of various kinds. What draws you particularly to that form?
Well, I can tell you a little story because I didn't start out writing poems like that. I had two ambitions. One was to be a teacher, which also meant being, a writer as well, being in the literary and academic world. I also wanted to be an actor, and I was very serious about that, and had a kind of small acting career in Boston and live theater and on the radio. And I lost my teaching job and got another teaching job in which I would have to teach at night. which meant that I couldn't act in live theater because I'd be working at night. And I was a kind of major turning point in my life. And I really had to decide, do I have the guts to give up everything to be an actor? And some of the actors I knew had become very successful. And some of the actors I knew who were just as good couldn't even get a job doing a commercial. And would I have the courage to take that risk and essentially give up my academic life and my literary life? And I really didn't. For one thing, I really cared about teaching and I really cared about working in literature, but I was also kind of scared of, or too scared to take the risk of, I didn't know if I was good enough. I really just didn't know if I was good enough to make a life as an actor. And I had been writing poems that were mostly kind of short love poems or, very personal things. Poems that kind of sounded like everyone else my age was, poems that everyone else my age was writing. And suddenly I got bored with what I was writing. And I thought, what if I wrote something in the voice of someone else, either real or made up, just as a kind of exercise? And some of the old poems, I mean, Chaucer is, look at the Canterbury Tales. It's this masterpiece, mainly written with other people's voices, or Robert Browning or Frost. And I thought, let me give it a shot. And the first poem I wrote was actually turned out to be the first poem I ever really published in a national magazine. And I started writing these poems in other voices. And it didn't even occur to me at the time that it was in some way, because I couldn't be an actor on the stage, I could be a kind of actor, writing these monologues in the voices of other characters, of other people, most of whom turned out to be real people. And that led to, writing in the voice of one character led to writing in the voice of multiple characters. And so dialogues became the sort of next step from that, and then various kinds of narrative poems. And I feel, I mean, I look back at this, I had no idea what was happening at the time, but I look back on it and I think, the poems that are really my poems are often in the voices of other people who are not me. One of my characters, an artist, in one of my poems, called Self-Portrait, says that every painting is a self-portrait. And I think in a way, all my poems are self-portraits, even though they're not kind of literally depicting my real self.
That's a fascinating story and such a great answer to that question. And it sort of touches on another question someone asked about dialogue and stuff. But one comment, I won't read the question because it's a little repetitive to our last one, but the question started with, "What a fantastic reading!" exclamation point. And there are quite a few comments in the chat.
That's a very good question. I love that question.
Yeah, and I'm also monitoring the chat, and there are a lot of similar comments. So I've been asked one more question. Before we do, I just wanted to mention just all the praise in the chat and everyone being so excited to be here tonight. Just wanted to mention that. But I will ask one more question. Okay. So have you found it difficult to write during COVID, or have the lockdowns and isolation been inspiring? I've heard both from other writers, so I'm curious what you've experienced.
My experience has been it's been really difficult. I have actually started some new poems, but I haven't finished them. They haven't gotten very far. I think they're promising, and I hope I can get back to them. But I also almost perversely haven't been doing some of the things that I really love to do. I haven't been listening to a lot of music. I used to go to concerts 5 or 6 nights a week. And of course, you can't do that, but you can play records. And I haven't been. And it's as if I'm saying, I'm just, you know, wait until everyone is safe and that I feel comfortable in the world. And that for me, I mean, you write in isolation, but you write in isolation also as part of a world. And right now I feel I still feel cut off from the world. I'm so grateful for like being able to do this reading on Zoom, and so grateful to whoever is, watching and listening. But it hasn't been a good time for the creative side of my life. I don't, I'm not feeling it.
That's true for a lot of people. And I realize now I probably should have asked that question earlier, not ended with that one, but still, it was a wonderful event. And so I just want to say thank you once again. And I also want to thank Gail once again for her lovely introduction. And I want to thank everyone out there for spending your Wednesday night with us. You can learn more about Lloyd's and Gail's books and purchase them on harvard.com or via the link in the chat. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore in Cambridge, Massachusetts, have a great night. Keep reading, and please be well, everyone. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you, Claire.